Okay, all right. So we are now live, so you can go ahead, Vice Chair Royce.
Okay, thanks very much. Welcome to the Finance and Audit Committee's October 26th Advisory Body Meeting. This is a teleconference meeting with advisory body members, city staff, and members of the public participating remotely to ensure proper social distancing during the federal, state, and local emergency. First, roll call, and I'd like to introduce staff and advisory body members present. The advisory body members include Theo Keat, Sean McGuire, Ron Shepard, myself, Roger Royce, and of course, Dan Jacobson, staff. So staff liaison, Dan Jacobson. So could you provide instructions to the committee, Dan?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you, Vice Chair Royce and members of the advisory body. Welcome everyone to the October 26th meeting of the Finance and Audit Committee, and thank you for attending. At this time, we ask that the members of the advisory body please remain on screen for the duration of the meeting. You will control your own webcams and microphones. A staff liaison will also remain on screen during the meeting to facilitate conversation and display necessary content. For members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment, after the chair calls for public comment on the item you wish to speak on, please engage the raise hand feature. I will then have the ability to open your microphone and you can provide your public comment to the advisory body. This concludes the instructions, and I return the meeting to you, Vice Chair Royce.
Okay, we'll start with regular business. And under regular business, the Finance and Audit Committee considers recommendations from city staff on policy matters or administrative actions that require Finance and Audit Committee approval. So our first item, if you've seen the attachment that was generated, is the commissions and committees' policies and procedures, roles and responsibilities. Is the city clerk, Judy Heron, here?
She is not, and actually we were unable to get a member of the city clerk's office this evening, so we will need to push this item to a future meeting.
Okay, we'll push that off to the next meeting. The second item is the discussion of the comprehensive annual financial report, the CAFR, for fiscal year ended June 30, 2019, and recommended changes for review by the city's independent auditors. So this item is discussion and changes. So Dan, can you introduce this item for me?
Absolutely. So there's no staff report for this item. The attachment is the CAFR for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2019. Each year, the city does prepare these financial statements. They follow generally accepted accounting principles and the Governmental Accounting Standard Board, or GASB, proclamations on how the document is prepared. The CAFR is largely prescribed within those bounds, but there are some opportunities for changes to the way content is displayed. And so that's what the Finance and Audit Committee has the opportunity to discuss and recommend today. The idea is that if there are any changes to things such as what content is included in notes, for instance, that's one thing that has come up in the past, or for instance, what content may be included in the transmittal letter, or how the transmittal letter is structured. That has been one that was recently changed in order to make it a little bit more accessible for the public. This is the opportunity for the Finance and Audit Committee to make those recommendations. And the idea is that we can present them to the city's independent auditor for their opinion on how well they fit within the GAP and GASB limitations for how the CAFR is prepared. And so there will be that opportunity to recommend changes and then incorporate any of them that do fall within that guidance in order to make the following year's CAFR more accessible to the public. The CAFR is generated generally over the course of about the month of November each year. So the fiscal year ends on June 30th. The CAFR as a document is prepared in the month of November and then issued for receiving and filing by the City Council at typically their last business meeting in December, which is the beginning of December. So any questions from the Finance and Audit Committee at this point on this item?
Is there any public comment on this item, first of all?
I have a general question, Dan. I've read through it and I've found a number of typos and other things that I think could be a little clearer. Rather than taking up the time of the committee, is it fine for me just to put those in writing to you?
Absolutely. So certainly things like typos, there is no concern about changing those. There's no, obviously we would like to have things as accurate as possible for typos. So if you do send a list of those ones, we can gladly incorporate those. And if you'll give me just a second, I do need just a second to find my instructions for public comment so that I can open that up.
Okay. While you're doing that, this would not have been published yet. This is for fiscal year ending June 2020, right?
So the attachment is for the fiscal year ending June 30th, 2019, for consideration of what content would be changed for the one for the CAFR for June 30th, or for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020, correct. So the CAFR for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2020 has not been published. It has not been generated yet. We just completed most of the actual financials. And so the components that go into that, the transmittal letter, the MD&A, all of the various schedules are being prepared now, or will be prepared over the next month or so.
Dan, my meaningful question about this is really in the area of the management discussion, and I'm wondering, how extensive and what kind of comments are going to be made about the impact of the COVID. And also, if Prop 15 gets passed next week, is there going to be comment on the effect of that on the tax revenues?
So those are excellent questions. If I may, can I open it to public comment and then come back to those questions and any future question or any other questions the members of the Finance and Audit Committee have?
Sure.
Okay. All right. So at this time, for members of the public who are in attendance and wish to provide public comment, please at this time click the raise hand feature on your screen there. At that point, I will open your microphone and you'll have the opportunity to provide comment to the Finance and Audit Committee. So at this time, are there any members of the public who wish to make a public comment on this item, item C2, which is discuss the comprehensive annual financial report, or CAFR, for the fiscal year ended June 30th, 2019, and recommend changes for review by the city's independent auditors? At this point, I do not see any hands raised. So last call, anyone who wishes to make a public comment? Okay, it appears there are no public comments, so I will turn it back to the Finance and Audit Committee. There were, I believe, two questions at this point. One is about the management discussion and analysis, and the other is about a proposition. So I'll take the management discussion and analysis first. So your question about the effects of COVID and where that would be included would probably actually go in the transmittal letter. So the guidance for the transmittal letter does allow a little bit more so it would actually probably go in two places. It would go in the transmittal letter because it wouldn't be a strictly factual, numbers changed from this to this compared to prior year type thing, which would be more of what's expected in the MD&A, though certainly that would be included in the MD&A. The sort of more narrative discussion about the effects of COVID-19 and the pandemic would be in the transmittal letter, but I fully anticipate that there will be a fair amount of real estate within those two portions of the CAFR that discuss the effects of the pandemic. That said, it will be focused on the last 4 months of the fiscal year. That is what happened from March through June, because it is the financial statements for the fiscal year that ended in June. So while there are a number of effects that will continue to be seen past the end of the fiscal year, most of the comments, certainly everything in the MD&A, will talk about just that period. The transmittal letter may discuss future effects or future anticipated effects of the pandemic going forward, just based on the guidance of the types of comments that can be included in those two sections.
Well, right now, just looking at last year's, in the MD&A, there are forward-looking comments about how things are going to move forward. And so I understand that it's going to be pretty difficult to project how this is all going to play out, but you certainly can't be silent on it.
Absolutely not. No, and it, like I said, it fully intend that a substantial amount of real estate will be devoted to the pandemic, because that really is going to be the biggest change compared to prior years, and the biggest sort of event that went on in the fiscal year. To talk just a little bit more about the difference, the transmittal letter can be a little bit more of a narrative and speculative, whereas the MD&A needs to be based on more hard facts, so less of the speculation, though there are certainly cases where much or all of the evidence points in one direction, and I think that much of the effects of the pandemic would fall in that category.
Mhm.
So the other question was about Proposition 15, and can, I think, be thought about in the broader context of anything that is happening during the current election. So subsequent events are sometimes included in the CAFR. So for instance, in the CAFR for the year ended June 30th, 2019, there was the refunding of general obligation bonds that happened in October. That was included as a subsequent event because it was material and it was easy to anticipate the effects. I do not know that most of the propositions which are on the ballot are the same in terms of being able to readily understand what the effects will be. So for the refunding, it was very clear the net present value of the refunding was $2.5 million. For Proposition 15, it will take years to determine the true effect of Proposition 15, and if it is in fact passed.
Yeah.
So there is the possibility that, to the extent the outcome of many of the propositions is known by the time the CAFR is fully prepared, that it could be included, particularly in the transmittal letter. Just given the way this election is going and the fact that so many ballots will probably take a fair amount of time to be read and the outcomes determined, it's not clear that that will be available by the time that the CAFR needs to be published. And again, just sort of the speculative nature of it. I can certainly anticipate some of the ones that are much more impactful on city finances. There could be a mention of them, but I would anticipate that most of those will show up in the following year's CAFR as a little bit more detailed, and to the extent that the effects are known, included there. But again, some of these will take years to determine and won't actually change city finances in the immediate term.
Okay.
And who's responsible for the MD&A? Is that the finance department or the city manager?
It's a collaboration. So the finance department typically does some measure of, preparing the schedules that go into it, preparing the graphics, and some measure of the narrative that goes into it. The city manager typically has much more of it provides much more context for things, which things are truly important and should be reported onto the community. And then, of course, does the review of the MD&A. So city manager has that role in coordination with the finance team.
Does any of that reviewed with the mayor before that goes out? Do you know?
So the CAFR is a management document. So it is provided to the city council.
Okay. And I had one other question. The prior audit report had a number of footnotes on pensions. And I recommended that you have, in addition, one footnote that's summarized, because you've got 4 funds, and that I could not find any a footnote that put together all the information from those 4 funds to include, for example, how many employees are in each of these funds, what the expected liability is, what the funding is, and what the unfunded portion is. I couldn't find anywhere in there what those numbers were added up so you could tie them back to the financial statements. So there was separate on safety people, there was separate on other, and I thought there should be something to combine it.
So this is certainly something that could be presented to the auditor for their sort of opinion on it. It would be probably beyond my skill to put together something that totally accurately summarized everything, and I think that that's the big tension here, is that the financial statements must show all of the factors that are included, and this is based on GASB proclamations as to what information needs to be included for those pension related notes. So everything that's in there is required at this point. So that's not to say that there couldn't be additional information that summarizes it like you suggest, but I think it would be a fairly heavy lift to prepare that in a way that would not materially change what's represented, but would make it more available for the public. So that is something that I would absolutely, I could certainly use the support of the Finance and Audit Committee if there were preparation of what that might look like. And certainly the finance team, the city's auditors could work on what numbers support that. But in terms of the what that narrative looks like, that's not in the typical course of preparation of a CAFR.
I've presented a format before, and it's really about a 2x3 footnote that just has 4 columns and said, the funds, the fund, I didn't have the number of employees, but I think that would be helpful. The liability, the funding, and the unfunded liability add up to get a total. I don't know why that would be that difficult to do.
So with the possible exception of the number of employees, all of those numbers are included. So I don't know that there would be any opposition to including that, other than that it would be
included, but
of the information that's in there.
They're in separate footnotes. That's my point.
And so that would be a recommendation that the Finance and Audit Committee could make if it desired to do so.
Okay. How do we do that? Can we make a recommendation now?
Sure. Just a second. I just got. So I was reminded by another of the finance team that this recommendation was made a couple of years ago, and our auditors at the time said that that was not allowed. That is not to say that we could not run it by our auditors now. Of course, the guidance does change over time, and while I don't think that any of the recent guidance has addressed either notes or pensions, that's not to say that we couldn't consider it again. So this item is agendized as discuss and recommend, so it is perfectly acceptable for the Finance and Audit Committee at this point to make a recommendation to include it in the CAFR. We will take it to the auditors for their consideration. And when they're here next month, they can give their opinion on whether that would be appropriate to include in the CAFR.
Okay.
Well, can't something like that just go in the MD&A or someplace else? I mean, I don't know how you could talk the auditors into changing their notes.
So there is some leeway in what's in the notes, and to the extent that so the MD&A typically, so it has I think 6 components of what need to go in the MD&A. This really would be more of a note or potentially a supplementary item, and that's one of the things that the auditors, working with a number of CAFRs, they may have seen something similar in another organization. They may be able to give us a little bit more context that I don't have at my fingertips right now. So that's why I would suggest that if the Finance and Audit Committee does desire to include this summarized table of pension obligations, that they do make that recommendation and we take it to the auditors for their opinion.
Dan, when is our meeting with the auditors to go over the audit report?
It is on November 18th.
And everything's going to be, the audit report will be finished by then?
The independent auditor's report will be ready. So that will be their report on internal controls, and similar to what they give on a regular basis. The CAFR itself will not be ready at that point.
Okay.
So we'll meet on 11/16 with the auditors.
The 18th.
18th, I'm sorry. And that will be another virtual
It will be, yes. We do
Well,
not
now-
anticipate that the advisory bodies will meet in person for some time yet.
Okay, thank you.
Then how do we get our recommendations to the auditors? Do we send it to you?
So if the Finance and Audit Committee just makes a motion and votes on the recommendations to send to the auditor, I will compile all of them and send it to them, so that they can, and really it is in some cases probably just a matter of finding where is the correct place. So if it's a summarized pension item, whether it's transmittal, probably not transmittal letter, whether it's MD&A, note, supplementary information, it's a matter of finding where to put that, I think. But the Finance and Audit Committee doesn't need to write the note. They just need to tell me what needs to go in the note, and I will send it to the auditors. The exception would be if you have seen another note or some component in a different CAFR that's a great example of what you would like included. That makes it really easy to copy what they have and do something similar.
Dan, I have one other question on the schedules. There are pages and pages of schedules labeled schedule of revenues, expenditures, and changes in fund balances, budget to actual. And each one of those has the comparison budget to actual, and in the budget, there's an original budget and a final budget. And I was wondering, what the difference between those two are and whether it's necessary to have both of them in there.
So the original budget is the budget that is adopted by City Council prior to the beginning of the fiscal year. So for this fiscal year, that would be the budget that was adopted on June 30th, 2020. And then the final budget is the accumulation of the original budget plus any amendments that are made over the course of the year. And so what that does is that does offer the distinction for, in particular, if we're looking at years like the current year, there's going to be some pretty wide variation between the adopted budget, so the original budget, and the final budget, particularly when looking at, say, the general fund, which was hit hardest by COVID-19. And so I can't point to a GASB proclamation which says both of those need to be included, but I can certainly look that up if that's something that is of great interest of removing one or the other, presumably removing the original. But I think that it does give the context of where the budget started and all of the amendments that happened over the course of the year in that fund.
Now, I wasn't suggesting that it necessarily needed to be changed. I was really wanting to understand it. So these changes between the original and the final budget, these would be recommendations that are taken to the council and that the council accepts and adopts.
Yeah, exactly. So staff so the City Council could identify amendments to make on their own, but typically that they start at the staff level and are made as recommendations, as you mentioned. And once they make those changes in appropriations, those get added to that final budget. So whatever that change is gets added to the original, which creates the final.
Have there been any changes based on what we know already from the original?
So for which fiscal year? So the answer is yes. The question is which fiscal year, and is there a particular fund you're curious about?
For the current fiscal year.
So yes, we have had a handful of them. This current fiscal year, 2020-21 is a particularly strange one. So there are a number of them that I wouldn't have anticipated in a normal year. So one of them was for carryover numbers. So there was a sort of reconciliation for the capital improvement plan to make sure that all of the projects that are included in that had the correct amount of funding. And that was just that happened as a result of the way the budget was developed this year, given that there was so much additional consideration compared to prior years. And then there have been a handful of small ones. So things like there was additional money appropriated for planning review. There was some additional money that was appropriated for short-term rental regulation. So each of these is a relatively small appropriation. They happened over the last couple months. More will continue to happen over the course of the year. And this is actually going to be part of the discussion later tonight, but there will be a fairly large bundle of them that's anticipated to go before the City Council for consideration on November 10th.
And so these would be in the minutes to the council meetings?
They would, yep. and most of them will have a title along the lines of appropriate $35,000 for short-term rental regulation, or appropriate $35,000 from the general fund unassigned fund balance for short-term rental regulation, something along those lines.
Okay, thank you.
So any other questions that I can answer at this point?
So you need a motion, right?
So if the Finance and Audit Committee does desire to make a recommendation for something to change in the CAFR, we would need a motion and a vote, yes.
Well, I heard a couple things. So help me here. One is a suggestion to summarize pension notes, right? Or summarize the pension items in the notes. Ron?
Yeah.
How would we phrase that? Help me, since this is your idea.
That write a footnote that summarizes the estimated liability, the amount that's been funded, and the unfunded balance in the 4 pension funds.
Okay, that's one.
So the only clarification I had there is I heard members as well in the past. Is there a desire to include the number of members included in each of those plans, or just the liability, market value of assets, and unfunded liability?
Well, it would be interesting to have the number of employees, but I thought you said that was difficult to do.
No, I think that those numbers are known for the CAFR. There are active members, inactive members. There are different categories of them. It will make the table wider, but they can't be included. So it would be easiest to focus on the financial numbers. So the liability, market value of assets, unfunded liability being the difference.
Okay.
One other common one is funded ratio that's fairly easy to do.
Yeah, okay.
All right. What else? Of the ideas we've talked about, what else? Would a committee like to go into a motion?
Well, Sean wanted a comment about the effect or possible effect of COVID.
Right.
And I think that's in the world of writing audit reports, there's some ex-partners here. I think that's a substantial subsequent event that ought to be spoken to.
Yeah, can't imagine they wouldn't address that. I mean, it's not even a subsequent event. It's affected things since last.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's almost like if you run a business and one of your major clients goes bankrupt, after the close of the year, you would want to make a statement about what that might have on your receivables.
Right.
And the other area that could fall in is the risk area.
So just as a reminder that not all of this information may be readily available at the time that the CAFR needs to be prepared, we will certainly include that there is some uncertainty going forward. The only change would be if no changes happened, but given that we may not have the outcomes, we may not be able to say that. So we can certainly speak to the fact that there may be some uncertainty as a result of the propositions. But I do just want to be careful to, just based on the timing of these and when the election is, while I agree that they could very well be material subsequent events, they may be so subsequent that there is not time to incorporate them.
I feel that there's much more of an issue with the implications of COVID and what it's doing to the hotel occupancy taxes, what it's doing to staffing, what it's doing to other revenue sources, much more so than being concerned with what the propositions are going to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And what it's doing if Facebook up and leaves town.
And we will include that will be one of the major points that's covered in both the transmittal and the MD&A is the effect of the pandemic. You do bring up a very good point about the transient occupancy tax that will likely also be a subsequent event, just for a number of reasons. But that will be called out specifically as well.
Okay.
Okay, that's two. Was there anything else? Okay, then, and I think the motion would be that the committee would recommend that the CAFR be updated in two respects. One, to include a statement in the footnotes summarizing the estimated liability, amount funded and unfunded liability and pension plans. And secondly, that the CAFR include a discussion of the effect of the pandemic as a material subsequent event on city revenues. Does that sound right? Anybody want to?
Mhm.
And
Yeah,
then Dan, I guess you would write that resolution, right?
Yes, so if I have this correct, the motion is recommend that the CAFR be updated with two respects: summarize pension items, that is plan liability, market value of assets, unfunded liability and funded ratio, and that there is an included discussion of the effects of the pandemic. The only thing that I left out, and please correct me if you would like them to remain where they were, is the location of those. Again, I would defer to the auditors as far as where in the CAFR those are included. Just to make sure that they fit where is most appropriate.
Makes sense.
Yeah, I would, right.
Okay, and is there a second for that motion?
I'll second it.
All in favor?
So it sounded like there were several seconds. Can we do this by acclamation then?
I think so.
Sure.
Okay, so hearing no opposition, this one will be by acclamation.
Okay. We're ready to move on to C3, our next topic, which is topics of the Finance and Audit Committee semi-annual update to City Council. Can you introduce this, Dan?
Absolutely. So this item is really just a preparation item. There is, at this point, updates to the City Council are not scheduled as far as I know. The clerk may have updated those in the meantime, but the Finance and Audit Committee does make a regular update to the City Council. Typically, that is the items on the Finance and Audit Committee's work plan that have had some progress made and where the Finance and Audit Committee stands on them. That's typically given by the chair. And so I put this item was included on the agenda as just a way to begin preparation for that, understanding that it doesn't need to be approved in terms of what goes to council just yet. They are typically around the beginning of the year for the semi-annual update. So I wouldn't be surprised if it were, say, the second meeting in January or not too long thereafter. So there is some time to decide. There is some time to make for the Finance and Audit Committee to discuss and approve what goes to council. But I do just want to prepare that ahead of time and start having that discussion ahead of time.
Could Roger and I meet and prepare a draft? I'm volunteering you, Roger. What do you think?
Yeah, we can do that. I mean, we've already started that process, although we're mostly successful at taking things off of our list from last year. Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
I mean, we've already done most of it. The approved projects of the annual investment policy review, we've done that and recommended no changes. Annual auditors review, we will do that. Open.gov support and community training, we've already had a presentation on that. Then the capital improvement plan, Roger, you and your subcommittee have issued a report, so that report would go in.
Yes.
Then the pension liability communication, we had a meeting with the actuary and went over the what is it? It's the GovInvest software. And then the comparative benchmarks, we sort of haven't done anything with that yet. So I guess Brian and I are supposed to get together on the comparative benchmarks, and we haven't done that.
So
So
just by way of,
we would say that that's in process. So that's
So-
kind of the report, I think.
So just by way of procedural, the procedural aspect of this, there does need to be an agendized recommendation for the council. So fully supportive of whoever the Finance and Audit Committee identifies to prepare those that essentially draft report or draft items to be reported on to council. That will need to go on a Finance and Audit Committee agenda and be approved by the Finance and Audit Committee prior to going to the council. But if the Finance and Audit Committee or the members here today decide to identify who to prepare that, that is very reasonable and would meet the needs of it. The other one procedural note is that we do need to take public comment on this at some point.
So if Roger and I prepare a draft and agendize it, that's about all we can do now, right?
Yeah, I think we should open it for public comment first, and then we'll determine that item.
You
Okay.
public comment now, you mean, Roger? Or
No, I think we have, I mean, Dan, you said we need a public comment on this item.
Yes, we do need to take public comment on this item.
Yeah, before we can act as a committee.
yeah, but if it's agendized, don't we have public comment at the meeting where we agendize it?
Well, that would be on our recommendation, but I think we have to have public comment on, I guess, what items should go into that update. I think that's how it works procedurally. If I'm wrong, Dan will tell me.
That is accurate, though public comment could, encompass any number of other things related to this.
Right.
Just do need to open it up.
Okay, so Dan, is there any public comment on this item?
Okay, so for members of the public who are in attendance and wish
I'm
to
sorry.
provide public comment, please at this time engage your raise hand feature, and I will allow you to address the Finance and Audit Committee. Okay, at this time, we have one member of the public. We have Lynn Bramlett, who is interested in addressing the committee. Lynn, I have unmuted you on our end. You are now able to address the Finance and Audit Committee.
Good evening, gentlemen. And I'm not sure if my comment is here or D2, but I'm Lynn. Can you all hear me, first of all?
Yes, we can, Lynn.
I
Okay.
can.
So I'm a resident who's taken an interest in the city's financial affairs, and I normally attend these meetings. I'm also now the main leader of a community-based disaster preparedness group called MPC Ready. Because of that, I now attend fire board meetings. And because of these two roles, I learned about something that has prompted my suggestion. Specifically, I learned recently that Menlo Park has been paying the Menlo Park Fire Protection District about $50,000 a year. Currently, $4,166.67 for emergency preparedness services. So just what services have been provided were a topic of came up at a recent fire board meeting, as well as the contract. So we have no current contract, and there is, reasonable questions were raised about what are we getting for that money. So long story short, Mayor Taylor has been briefed on this topic, and she's going to arrange a suitable meeting. So the matter will be looked into, but I bring it up to you because it's really difficult to track this kind of thing, reoccurring payments that maybe should be reexamined unless one happens to kind of be in the situation I was in, if you will. Emergency preparedness lies in the police department. Apparently, we've outsourced this to a quarter-time employee of the fire district, but there's no line item for that. So I only learned about this recently. Anyway, my main point is, could we be making reoccurring vendor payments for contracts that have expired or for services we might not be receiving? And I think here they just get paid, and there's no city council review, whereas in some states it's considered a best practice to have council review them, even via consent calendar. And, we could be saving money. I mean, 50,000 here whatever it is. So I just asked that the Finance and Audit Committee, it would add more fiscal control to have council review them, or at minimum, kind of run a report seeing how many payments are in this category and should these be looked into. So I just ask that you consider discussing the topic of the city's accounts receivable payment process to consider if it needs improvement for more fiscal control.
Okay.
Great. Thank you, Lynn.
I think you're right. I think that's a D2 item. I'm not sure if that'll go in the update at this point, but Ron and I can discuss that when we get together on the agenda, or when we get together on the proposed update.
Yeah, okay. I've made a note of it.
Okay.
Okay, so there is no action required on this item, but hearing no opposition, it does make sense to have a subcommittee work on what those recommendations are, particularly the chair and vice chair, given that the chair typically presents to City Council of the update for the Finance and Audit Committee.
Okay. Okay, Ron, we'll take that offline. Is there any other discussion of the Finance and Audit Committee semi-annual update to City Council? Okay, let's move on to D, reports and announcements, director's report. So under reports and announcements, of course, important information may be transmitted to the committee. So Dan, can you provide us with the director's report?
Absolutely. So several major things going on within administrative services, and this is on behalf of Nick Pegueros, Assistant City Manager, who is also acting as the Administrative Services Director, as that position was eliminated from this year's budget. So the first major item is that there are operational reports on tomorrow's City Council agenda. So these include the preliminary report for fiscal year 2019-20, as well as the first quarter report for 2020-21. These are under the item that is updates on city operations. And there are also some other pieces that go into that, including some ways that the city's services have been changed as a result of the pandemic, and likely some of the same themes which are likely to show up in the CAFR. The second major item that we just touched on very briefly earlier, but on November 10th, staff anticipates recommending a number of budget amendments for fiscal year 2020-21. They will focus on the City Council priority projects first. So these are the top 5 priority projects on the City Council's work plan. The remainder of that work plan, and then there are likely to be a handful of other recommended amendments which address other operational items for the city, but are not included under work plan items. So that, again, is anticipated for November 10th. And then the last...
I'm sorry, I didn't get this. So on 11/10, you get an update on proposed budget change?
Yes, so city staff will be making a number of recommendations for City Council's consideration to amend the fiscal year 2020-21 budget.
And that's at a council meeting?
Operating budget or capital improvements?
It will be a combination of both. So there are likely to be some operating items in there, and there are likely to be some that are related to capital improvement plan projects as well. And that will be, yes, on the City Council's public meeting for that evening. Okay, and then the last item is that the IT master plan is one of those City Council priority items, so it's in that top 5 list. It is not anticipated at this time that there is a need for additional resources during fiscal year 2020-21, however. And if there are no other questions or comments, that does conclude the director's report for this evening.
Nosy, did you add a staff person who had resigned about a year ago? That was your right-hand person, went to work, I think, for Apple or Google. And I thought I saw his name on a note that we got.
So we have not gotten that particular staff member back, unfortunately, though we would love to take him back if anyone, is in contact with him.
That's why I was curious.
It's possible that at the bottom of some report, I accidentally left his name updating a
Oh,
previous
okay,
one.
okay.
That seems like the most likely case, but he
I'm just curious,
has not returned.
you're not happy to see him go, and I thought maybe you.
Well, it was mixed emotions. He was a very talented employee, so definitely sad to see him go, but glad that he had the opportunity to try out something else.
Did his first name begin with B?
Yes.
Okay.
Clever fellow, that Sean.
Anything else on D1? Okay, let's move on to D2, future agenda topics and committee member reports. So we had subcommittees and individuals, members were appointed to focus on work plan items. So do we have any reports? The first one is a capital improvement plan accessibility subcommittee. There's been no changes to the report that, God, it's been almost a year now, I think, since we did this. But if people have questions about it or want to talk about our CIP, happy to address that. Since I'm here anyway. Did everybody get that, by the way? Well, you should look at it. It's a pretty detailed, I guess, set of recommendations on the capital improvement plan. I think we're pretty comprehensive. I think there's some good ideas and some good suggestions in there. So at some point, it'd be nice for everybody else to weigh in on it.
I thought it was a very, very good report, and I guess one of the problems is that it was kind of a parking lot issue, as far as I can tell. So the council's not, well, maybe they are. I don't know. I thought we presented that at a council meeting. I thought Sudi did,
She did?
but we
Okay,
didn't get
I
any
know that.
feedback, because we've had the same kind of issues come up before, Roger, and you guys summarized them very nicely, but Lynn's been on this forever.
Yeah.
And
Well, we should maybe update it then.
nobody's interested, I guess. I don't know.
Well, it kind of goes to the core of our mandate, doesn't it? I mean,
Yeah.
information and disclosure. So if it's been presented to council, then I would assume that some things have probably changed and it's time to go revisit and update.
Okay.
So I might interject here for just a moment and say that many of the suggestions that were included in that have been incorporated to the extent that there has been capacity, and many of others are planned. This has been part of the transition to OpenGov for budgeting and reporting. So the budgeting portion that transition has been completed. This year's budget was completed entirely within OpenGov, and now the reports are available through OpenGov. So as I mentioned, the items that are going for council's consideration tomorrow are actually on OpenGov, and they do use that reporting platform. So there is additional reporting. There are additional reporting tools that are available now that weren't available in the past. We did not anticipate the pandemic taking up so much capacity during this previous spring. That was when we had planned to make some additional improvements to that, but we will continue to do so over the next coming months. And then the last piece is that with the transition to OpenGov for financial accounting software, that will change some of our capabilities for how quickly and how transparent things can be presented and included in those reports. So we are looking forward to improving the availability of the information to the public in the not too distant future, and do intend to continue making incremental improvements to the capital improvement plan in terms of how it's reported and displayed.
Well, that's one of the things that maybe Ron and I'll talk about putting on the update.
Yeah.
But
Okay.
definitely, I think we want to make that an ongoing project and monitor it, and a process of continuing improvement, I'd say. So the next one, Ron, is pension liability subcommittee. Do you have a report?
No, we just we went through the presentation. I think we all thought the software was pretty powerful, and we were led through some changes, particularly in what happens to if you change the investment income or the discount factor, how that changes the liability. there was some things that were not included in the packet that issues were raised. For example, I guess there's a standard life expectancy statewide, and it's not adjusted for life expectancy in certain regions or life expectancy for male versus female. So I think those were some of the things that were raised that are not included. But I think overall we were fairly impressed with the software. Am I speaking out of turn to Sean and Teo?
No, Joe, I agree with that. That's right.
I would agree with that too. I have to admit I haven't spent as much time with the software on my own as I want to, but I'm planning to rectify that here soon. And I think then the question is whether or not we have any particular recommendations. From my point of view, given that we are required by CalPERS to make the additional contributions each period, the only real question would be whether we felt we needed to do anything over and above that. And I would be very loath to suggest anything over and above that right now, while we've got so many other uncertainties going on. That's just my personal view.
Yeah. My only additional comment is we Menlo Park can't change some of the rules and regulations, but I think there are some that could be changed that would help the liability situation if you could get other cities and counties to join forces. And I don't know if you have time to do that or if you have groups that meet where you can discuss. And one of the things I bring up is to continue to be able to hire people who are retired on more than 900 hours a year. And the benefit would be, for example, with the police, that I know you guys are probably tired of hearing this, that, if a policeman's retired and you continue to have him work for you, you've got somebody who knows what they're doing, generally speaking, and you don't have to pay any benefits. So you save the benefit cost versus hiring a new policeman and you've got them on the pension plan, or you got for anybody, it could be finance or anybody, but you've got to, Menlo Park can't do anything about that. I don't know if you have a bag or a big A bag or, where you can, something like that could get some traction. But I've spoken to the police officers and they like it. So, but I don't know where you go with something like that.
So I will point out that there's actually a governor's order that is addressing the pandemic that does allow retired annuitants to exceed the regular 960-hour per fiscal year threshold, depending on how that relates to the pandemic. And the city does have a number of retired annuitants working for it. So that is something that the city has understood as being beneficial as a way to leverage their knowledge and is doing so actively.
Great.
Later on, they took your suggestion.
Well, it's only temporary, I presume. I'd like to make it permanent.
Yeah. Anything else on pension liability? How about, sorry. Comment? How about the comparative benchmarks subcommittee?
We haven't done anything.
Okay, well, that's easy. And any individual finance and audit committee member assignments?
I kind of like to report, I think it's a month ago, the city council had a meeting on establishing or changing the water rates. And Ray Mueller said that some of the residents have been asking, why are we in that business? why don't we get rid of the water department or consider selling it? And immediately got 3 responses, which was from Catherine Carlton, I don't want to sell it. From Betsy Nash, I don't think I want to sell it. And from the mayor, that she didn't want to sell it because she didn't want to lose control. And so I called him later and thanked him for bringing it up. And he said, Ron, this is something I don't want to put any weight behind because I don't have the support. So anyway, that's so I've kind of given up on that one temporarily.
Okay,
I know that's on our parking lot items, sale of assets.
well, okay.
So my report is there's no interest.
Well, that's too bad. But you know, you did your job. You raised all these issues and got it in front of the council. Any
Well,
other,
yeah.
any other items for our agenda, future agenda items?
This is not an item for the future agenda item, but we do actually now have a member of the city clerk's office who is available to go back and cover item C1, so that it doesn't need to be pushed to a future agenda.
With all due respect, I've read that and heard the presentation, which is great. So if you don't mind, I would bow out.
So if you leave, we will lose quorum and we'll need to do it at a later agenda, like at a later meeting.
Okay. Roger, why don't you suggest Judy take 3 minutes?
Okay, Judy. You're muted.
Thank you all. I do appreciate you guys allowing me to speak for just a couple of minutes here. I will do this presentation as quickly as possible. And for any questions, you guys can just connect with me offline if that works for you. So just confirming everyone's able to see my screen.
Yes.
Yep.
Wonderful, thank you. So attached to this agenda is City Council Procedure CC-19-0004, which was adopted by the City Council in March 5th of 2019. Tonight, I would want to review what is an advisory body, the work plan, the scope of authority, roles and responsibility of the chair, and then again, any questions which can be addressed offline, given the time constraints. So what is an advisory body? All of Menlo Park's commissions and committees, with the exception of the Planning Commission, are advisory in nature. The term advisory in nature, what it truly means is that the purpose of advisory bodies is to ask appointed community members to lend their valuable expertise to the City Council's current priorities. The City Council is the policy-making body, and the primary role of the advisory body is to provide judicious, thoughtful advice to the City Council. Here are a couple of examples of how advisory bodies can achieve assisting the City Council with their priorities. They're able to hear public testimony, which is done through public comment at meetings or through public hearings. The advisory body can study referred matters and return recommendations to the City Council. The advisory bodies can then forward those recommendations to the City Council for its consideration. And this is done through the advisory body work plan or work plan amendments that align better with the City Council priorities. Briefly going to touch on the work plan. The City Council provides direction to staff through their priority setting process. City Council actions and directions ultimately lay the foundation for all the work expected to be accomplished in that particular period. And similarly, each advisory body is required to develop an annual work plan that support those priorities that are set by the City Council. The work plan process, as an advisory body, or asked to develop an annual work plan, which is the foundation of the work performed by your advisory body that supports the City Council priorities. The body must approve the work plan by a majority vote, and then the work plan must be formally presented to the City Council for feedback and approval by September 30th each year. Now, in light of COVID-19 and the reactivation timeline of the advisory bodies, the City Council received an information item with the status of each advisory body's work plan. And this just provided a little bit more time for each advisory body to bring the work plans to City Council. And then the work plan is reported out quarterly by the chair. Next is clarity on the scope of authority. Advisory bodies are not involved in the administration or operation of city departments. And this just means that members may not direct staff to initiate programs and may not conduct major studies unless specified by their approved work plan. So for the staff, question is, what is the staff's role? And the staff liaison serves as the primary point of contact and resource for the advisory bodies. And these general tasks include providing a scheduled meetings, informing the body on directions, priorities of the City Council, informing the advisory bodies of events, activities, policy, programs that occur within the scope of the City Council approved work plan, ensure that agenda items that are approved by the advisory body are brought forth in a timely manner, always taking into consideration City Council priorities and City Council work plan. And finally is to take action. I'll briefly go over roles and responsibility of the chair. As you all know, the chair is the presiding officer of all advisory body meetings and is charged with preserving order and decorum at the meetings. The chair facilitates the involvement of all members of the advisory body and at the same time allowing for adequate public participation. And the chair can also limit members to the question under discussion and refrain the body from commenting or entering into conversation with speakers during public comments or during public hearings until all speakers have been heard. This can be done by holding off on members' questions or comments until the public comment period is officially closed, and also refrain members from discussions between the public, either written or verbal. In the absence of the chair, the vice chair shall act as the presiding officer. So in closing, the relationship with the advisory body members and staff is active, continuous, and nuanced. Both members and staff are motivated by the shared goal of furthering the city's best interests and assisting in achieving City Council priorities. And that does conclude my presentation. And again, I do appreciate that you guys are taking the time this evening for me to present it. And I apologize for the delay in my attendance. And I know Mr. Shepherd does have a hard stop. So again, if you have questions now, I'm happy to answer. Or if you'd like to connect with me offline, I'm also.
I have a question, Judy.
No, excuse me first. Don't we have to take public comment on this first?
Yes, it is an
I believe
agenda.
we
Sorry.
do. So let's open this to public comment first. Is Dan, there's Dan. Dan, you want to open the floor for public comment? You're on mute.
Oh, thank you. All right. Thank you. So at this time, if any member of the public is interested in speaking on this item, please use the raise hand feature and I will be able to unmute you and you may address the advisory body. So at this point, I do not see any hands raised. So last call for public comment on this item. And seeing no public comment, I will turn it back to you, Vice Chair Rice.
Okay, we'll now open to committee discussion. Sean, you had a question or comment?
Yes, a simple question, I hope. Judy, is there any difference between the committees and the commissions?
Thank you, Commissioner McGuire. So I do believe that the only difference is the number of members. I do believe that committees technically have 5 members, whereas commissions typically have 7. But there's no distinct difference between their role or their service to the city.
So they're both advisory bodies.
Correct. All of our committees and commissions are advisory, except for the Planning Commission. And that's just established by law.
Thank you.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Anything else? Okay. No other comments on that. So I think we can go on to, and there's no motion or action item for this item, no motion or any other action item for this one. So that concludes all of the business of this meeting. So thank you everybody for attending. Unless there's something else that somebody wants to raise, I'm going to go ahead and adjourn the meeting.
Thanks, Roger, for taking over.
You're welcome. Meeting's adjourned.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Thank
See you
you. We'll
next
see you
time.
next time.
Bye.
Thanks, Dan, Judy.